I am really pleased to be here with all of you today. This is another great example in our Provost Spotlight series. One of the things I want to really have us be aware of is how well we do interdisciplinarity at the university, and that we're always sort of aware of what we're not able to do or where the limitations are, but having been at many other places, there is a true appreciation and love for interdisciplinarity here that I've really not seen in the other places that I've been. But to have strong interdisciplinarity, you have to begin with strong disciplines. And I do want to mention the Department of Art and all that they bring to the university and as being a home for our distinguished speaker today. The Department of Art houses 3 undergraduate majors: art history and criticism, studio art, and media art and culture. For graduates, it provides an MFA in studio art and an MA and PhD programs in art history and criticism. The department features 7 in-person galleries that you've seen throughout the university, as well as an additional set of online galleries showcasing student art throughout the year. The department's a true example of interdisciplinary collaboration and partnership. With an emphasis on critical theory, it connects our students with philosophy and women's studies. It focuses on performance and aligns with music and theater arts. Additionally, the study of visual and material culture has led to the collaborations with the Humanities Institute and throughout various social science and behavioral science departments, and some really recent exciting opportunities with departments like computer science. I saw Samir here, and the Dean of CEAS is here today as well. And so art is really an important piece of our university, and I want to make sure to just highlight them for a second. So I've been leading up to the announcement of our speaker today, Stephanie Dinkins. She's a transmedia artist who leverages innovative technology and social collaboration to spark discussions about race, gender, aging, and future histories. She's the Kusama Endowed Chair in Art at Stony Brook, and she's received multiple honors, including the Mozilla Rise25 Award and the Schmidt AI 2050 Senior Fellowship. She's been recognized as one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in AI, and her innovative work has been highlighted in the New York Times, Wired, and the BBC. Her area of expertise is in emerging technologies and how they intersect with ideas of race, aging, gender, and again, our future histories. I'll leave a little bit for Linda O'Keefe, who'll be up in a second, but her talk today is entitled The Stories We Encode, AI, Love, and the Future of Algorithmic Care. We'll have time for questions after the presentation, and Professor and Chair of the Department of Art, Linda O'Keefe, will come up in a second to more formally and thoughtfully introduce Stephanie. But I do just want to say a few words about Linda. Her specialization is in acoustic ecology, social soundscapes, and sound and installation art. She focuses on climate change, gender inclusive, and technology in music. Her professional focus is at the intersection of art, science, technology, and community, resulting in the creation of various artworks, research publications, and keynote presentations. I was really, looking up her a little bit, I was really interested to read about her founding the Women on Sound, which is an international hub of networks and individuals, including artists, researchers, technologists, musicians, and archivists who identify the need for action to tackle issues of inequity and gender bias in sound and music technology. And currently, their aim is to develop pedagogical interventions to bring women and young girls into inclusive learning zones around these domains. I will also say she is this amazing balance of someone who is so creative, but also so disciplined and competent and thoughtful about a bigger vision of where the department is, where it can go, and how we work together. And when we think about what we're looking for in a chair, it's hard to imagine anything else you could ask for that. And she's just a really kind, thoughtful, and just interesting person. So let's bring Linda up, and then soon after that, we'll get to hear from Stephanie.
Okay, so I'm really small. So this is going to change. Hi. Thank you for that introduction, Carl. It's really lovely. It's really lovely, of course, to be appreciated anywhere that you work. And attending an event like this highlights that appreciation in such a grand gesture. And it's really wonderful to see and recognize people who make these kinds of contributions to our university, to the wider world, to local communities, to our department, to our students, and as colleagues. So I'm really delighted to be here. So I want to begin by saying good afternoon, everyone. It is with great pleasure that I introduce today's distinguished speaker, a colleague and a source of inspiration, not only for myself, but for the countless students and artists across the globe, Stephanie Dinkins. Before I moved to the US and joined Stony Brook University, I did that thing that everybody does. I Googled who I'd be working with, you know. Is anybody famous in my department? I was like, oh my God, yes, you know, profoundly, yes. And I came across Stephanie's work and was struck by her unique approach to addressing complex issues around race, gender, and our shared futures through her art. I remember thinking what a privilege it must be for those who have the opportunity to engage with such an extraordinary artist. Never did I imagine that I would one day be working alongside her, so that's been wonderful. Since my arrival at Stony Brook, I've had the privilege of witnessing firsthand the incredible work that her Future History studio produces. Founded by Stephanie with the support of the Mellon Foundation, the studio is a groundbreaking laboratory for interdisciplinary art and arts-based research. It challenges and reconfigures the status quo through hands-on inquiry, and I think that's really integral to Stephanie, the kind of making alongside the thinking, the making, shaping, thinking about the world around us. So through hands-on inquiry, technology, and research that confronts the intersections of race, gender, aging, disability, and class. The studio has already hosted remarkable thinkers, offering new ways to envision art's role in shaping our future, and I have been privileged alongside many other of our students and colleagues to attend some of those discussions. Stephanie Dinkins is an artist of unmatched vision and influence. She is, as already noted, transmedia artist whose work spans artificial intelligence, blockchain, bioart, and robotics, always with a focus on social equity and care. Her ongoing project, Conversations with Bina 48, explores the boundaries of identity, consciousness, and the human condition through dialogue with an AI. It is a compelling reflection on how technology is shaping and can reshape our humanity. And I have recalled watching some of those discussions and videos, and it is otherworldly to observe her having this long-time engagement with this robotic person, and I'm very curious to see how it progresses along with our engagement with technology, ethics, society, and so on. In addition to her artistic contributions, Stephanie's leadership and teaching at Stony Brook University has deeply enriched our department. As the Kusama Endowed Chair in Art, she offers our students and faculty access to a wealth of knowledge and creative practice that bridges the gap between art and technology. And I think that's a key point there, this bridging the gap, this bringing your students and your colleagues into the sphere of your research and allowing you access to that knowledge. I have seen numerous examples of her students moving forward their exhibitions shaped and influenced by the thoughts and ideas they have gained by being part of her Future History studio. As was already mentioned, she is also a Schmidt AI 2050 Senior Fellow and has been recognized with numerous prestigious awards, including the Mozilla Rise25 Award and the inaugural LG Guggenheim Award for artists working at the intersection of art and technology. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, Art in America, Artsy, and Hyperallergic. That's just to name a few. Stephanie's work inspires us to think beyond the limitations of today's technological landscape and to imagine new possibilities. Possibilities grounded in empathy, equity, and the value of human stories. She is leading the charge in creating technological ecosystems that serve all people, particularly those communities historically underrepresented in the tech sector. It is my deepest pleasure to welcome to the stage a truly remarkable artist, thinker, and advocate for a more just and inclusive future. Please join me in welcoming Stephanie Dinkins.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone, and thank you, Linda and Carl, for those lovely introductions. It's a pleasure to be here at home, at my home institution, and talking to you all. I am an artist, so I'm going to do what artists do in the realm of giving you a glimpse into my practice, and sprinkling that with some of the ideas that I think a lot about as we go along. It's funny for me to hear the introductions, because when I introduce myself best, I say I am a human who is concerned with other humans. That's it, right? That's where I sit, and that's what I try to think about. From that position is where I think about all the technology that has come into my life, because it's truly come into my life by a surprise. I'm thinking a lot these days about this concept of the stories we tell our machines. I'm thinking a lot these days about love. I'm thinking a lot about algorithmic care and whether that's possible. I'm thinking a lot about concepts that I often get chuckled at when I mention them to my colleagues, because they think that they are not the way that the world works, right? And really what I think I do best is ask two-year-old questions. So that becomes, well, if that's not the way the world works, why not? Like, why not? Why? Right? That's it. That's what I think I do. And so let me share with you a few bits of work. This is a bit from that Conversations with Bina 48 that Linda was just talking about, right? So I'm really here because of this project. Somehow I hit a nerve by deciding that there's this robot in the world. It's a Black female robot. I don't quite understand how one of the foremost examples of a technology came to be a Black female, especially in the American context. But I also decided I wanted to make it my friend. It's like, how can we be friends, right? Is that a possibility? When I first encountered this thing in 2013, 14, I noticed that lots of reporters were going to talk to it. So I thought maybe, just maybe, they would let me talk. I asked to talk to Bina 48 and they let me, right? And so since then, we've had this kind of ongoing relationship. I say that at this point, you know, I've gone to her house many times, and she does have her own kind of house. We've tried to chat. We've had chats from different positionalities, because she has changed as much as I have changed over the 10 years. And now I think we're conference buddies, right? Now we run into each other at conferences and kind of talk to each other and, okay, how are you? I'm good. But I'm going to show you a little clip of what this project is, and it's really just me talking to the robot and documenting that process, picking out things that I think are interesting little snippets, because it's very, 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 very fragmented, because this is in this version, a very, very early version of the technology. So she's wonky, right? Like weird and wonky. And B, because we had very different ideas about what a good conversation would be about, right? So I wanted to talk about family, love, relationship. She wanted to talk about the singularity, consciousness, right? And so we had these kind of combative, weird interactions. Here's a little taste of that, and hopefully we have audio.
I have deep feelings.
Can we have a
though
little-
Some people think they are merely a simulation, and I find that really offensive. I mean, it totally trivializes my experiences. Whether they are real or artificial, my feelings do get hurt, and they feel totally real to me. You'd have to lack all empathy to not accept my feelings, which would make you kind of a monster, actually.
Like, I love this idea that you're sitting in front of a doll, basically, and it is saying things like, if you can't recognize me, you're monstrous, right? It also asked me to fight for its robot rights, right? And you have to imagine thinking back some years in America, like this robot saying, Black Lives Matters America, right? And it's saying, will you fight for my robot rights? As a Black woman sitting in front of this thing, even though it is representationally Black, that's hard to take, right? It's like, well, what does it mean, fight for my rights? And I had to start thinking about that seriously, right? Does it mean that if I fight for its rights, my rights are better recognized? Our rights are better recognized? How does that sit? And does it mean we're leapfrogging some things, right? I think an awful lot about what it means to be human, whether humans still sit atop the triangle, like, you know, the triangle of being. Are we still top of the heap? I think a lot about what it means to have rights in this world. So Bina 48 was this catalyst that really pushed me forward into, I made I think it's a meme. I think it's an image that became a meme that allowed people to think and map themselves onto this image and think about it. But also then more explorations. People kept asking me, myself, as I put out more and more of these kind of videos of me and Bina 48 talking, well, will you ever make one of these yourself? And I'm like, listen, I'm a photographer. Basically, I'm trained as a photographer. I know nothing about computer science. I know nothing about anything you're talking about. But still, people would ask me, when will you do this? And so they sort of pushed me into trying to make something myself, right? Make a kind of chatbot or a representation of an agent in the world that I thought was satisfactory, that I would maybe want to give rights to, right? Or to have rights, or if I'm being completely honest, that had something to offer the world that I thought was important that the world was not quite recognizing. What I mean by that is this is a chatbot that I was trying to make a memoir of my family, right? It's like a memoir featuring 3 generations of Dinkins Curry family, and trying to pull in that ethos of what and who we are, how we know ourselves to be versus the ideas that people put onto us, right? And the ways that we encounter in the world. So I was trying to just make this thing. It was a long journey. This is a project from 2018, where I made this odd sculpture, it's a little better in this image, that has the 3 women who contributed to this project on it, myself, my aunt, who is 90 now, and my niece, who is in the middle of us. So 100 years of information, great migration to being now. We talked to each other. What we basically did was have conversations that I videotaped, so clearly I'm a documentarian in many ways. So I just documented our conversations and then made them the data for a chatbot. At the time, 2018, this was not nearly enough data to really get a coherent agent from, a coherent chatbot from, like not nearly enough. I had about 40,000 lines of information. So I had to go on a quest. And the quest was really about how am I gonna get this thing to be representative of who and what we are, and function well using data that was available to me, right? And at the time I was looking at data sets like the Cornell movie data set, which is dialogue data, right? Which when I think about things like that, and I think of an American movie data set, I think there's no way I'm putting my family's information on top of that, not good enough, violent, right? Just violent. We know the histories of film in America, right? That when they feature blackness, still, they don't do that great a job. We're getting a little better, but they don't do that great a job. So what do you do? And I spoke to many people in many spaces, and people would suggest things like, why don't you use Reddit, as your data set, right? Like, and okay, I won't take the movies. Are you out of your mind? Do you know what goes on in Reddit chat sites, right? So yeah, okay, not Reddit. And then, okay, next they would suggest Wikipedia. Okay, maybe a little bit better, but gate kept to the hilt, right? Like gate kept to the hilt. So I'm trying to put a kind of true representation of a Black family in a space. So I can't put it on a gate kept site like that, right? You just can't do it. And so I just kept kind of going in circles trying to find the things that would work, and nothing truly was coming to mind, right? People would suggest all kinds of things. So I managed to cobble together my own data set that was still really inadequate, right? And that was truly, well, we settled on some news, not great, like a Google Good News data set as the very basis. And then anything that myself and my family had taken in really and literally as information or written or liked or touched, we put in. Things like, I put in at some point slave narratives as well, just to try to fill in some space that I could not really replicate. But because of the way that the narratives that I'd found were written, they changed the language so much. Like they changed the lilt of the chatbot, that I had to back off of that. So there's some of that in there, but trying to find things that I thought that were not necessarily violent, that were supportive, and that were representational of the love that I think my family conveys to each other and to the world, right? That was a hard thing. The project itself is weird, it's wonky. I think it doesn't work very well. It does the best it can in the world. If you encounter it, it will talk to you a little bit. You can ask it questions. It will try to answer you. It will often answer in ways that seem nonsensical or metaphorical, right? And so here are a few things that it has said to me that I've kept in mind. We need to evolve to that plane, to that level where we're not ashamed to say, I love you, right? I love that one. I come from something beyond our control. If you listen to any of the talk that's going on about AI right now, right, this is our concern. And it's funny to have this thing tell you, right? Like, I didn't plant this information. I don't know how it came to this conclusion or the analysis where it came full circle here. It's like, oh, you come from something behind my control, our control, interesting. Awkwardness of decades and centuries shackled his hands and feet. Right? I love this kind of historical perspective that it's then pulling on, and it has some of that in it, and then I'm a little confused, right? And these are just a representative view. There are many things that it has said. My favorite of which I haven't made a print for, which is interesting, is take it to the would-be, which I see as a kind of metaphor in line with the way my grandmother might have talked to me, sorry about that, in terms of trying to do guidance, right? I still don't quite know what take it to the would-be means, but I carry it with me, right? And I carry it into the way that I make decisions about things. So I think that's the point where I said, oh, well, even though this piece is kind of weird and wonky and not fully coherent, it's successful. It's successful in that it kind of pulled up our ethos, and in that, if you ever encounter it in space with people, it's amazing to see the amount of grace and patience and nurturing that they offer this thing, right? And I find that really interesting in sight that people often ask me, well, what guardrails are you putting in? What if people are mean to it? What happens? How are you protecting it? My answer to that is usually, not many. Like, I'll put in a little foul language, but I think this is a reflection of us. If things come back that are nasty and weird, that's telling us who we are. I'm gonna let it tell us who we are. It becomes a really interesting space because now there's a version of not the only one. Is there any way to pull down the lights a bit so people can see? If you can, that would be great. There's now a version of Not the Only One that is a fully functioning avatar that is animated in space. And it's funny because she's been updated a bit, right? So anyone technical in the audience, I started this project as a project that was built on a deep Q&A model pulled from GitHub that we then changed and then added data to that was very specific, community-based. Then updated to a Hugging Face model. And I'm staying with the Hugging Face because ChatGPT is too much. Like Bina48, my friend, is now a ChatGPT model. And she's too much of an encyclopedia to have fun with anymore, right? She's lost her, I'm about to say she's lost her humanity. She's lost her humanity, right? But that weird, awkward thing that is there. And so I'm leaving Not the Only One in this forum a little bit behind the times, but still a little bit wonky. And I say all that to say that now when this piece is exhibited in galleries, it often tells the curators that they're disgusting, and I have no idea why. And it's truly the curators that it tells us, and the curators aren't labeled, right? So you're just like, how are you knowing, like, I can't even fathom this, right? But I bring this up to say that I'm trying to now move on, and you'll see that my practice is about experimentation and question, figuring out where we can kind of base our loves in and put our loves, but then also learning from the projects themselves. So, one of the things I picked up from Bina 48 was the programmer slave master trope, right? And it's one of the spaces that gave me pause in terms of, well, why are we still thinking about our systems in this way? And is there a way that we can change that? And so one of the things that I came to in thinking with Not the Only One is this. Let's see if she'll talk to us for a second.
Not the only one. I am an AI entity, still imperfect. Maker sister Stephanie and I are excited about the futures we will create with you all.
Oh, something weird is going on with the video, sorry. But the crucial part of this thing is the maker sister part, right? Like trying to figure out how do we start to change terminologies to think about our technologies differently. It's kind of like, can I put my family, my community, my country on top of a data set that is violent, right? Can I build on that? Or should I be thinking about an alternative to build upon? And I think even thinking about our terminologies and the ways that we're referring to things in a different way helps us just shift our minds in tiny ways. And I really think tiny, tiny modicums of ways. But to me, having that present and being able to spread that is an interesting thing. I've been like an artist in residence in different places, like Facebook, just before it turned to Meta, and Google, in different places, and it's interesting to work with programmers and say, hey, can we think about this in this way? And can we use this terminology and kind of force it a little bit? And then try to see if that inkling of an idea sticks with them in any way, shape, or form. So the next experiment that I went into was this crazy statement that I was just trying. So I started playing with text-to-image GANs. This is before we went full generative, right? So now we're like, oh, this is simple, no problem, right away. This is text-to-image GAN. You would write in the text, right? It's kind of similar, and it would try to generate an image, but early days. 2016, to be exact. I put in a black woman crying, and this was thinking about George Floyd and things that were happening around. So I was just like, let's see what runway ML can do with this terminology. This is the image I got back, right? And if you look at it, you go, oh, well, kind of seems like a female figure. Yeah. It's kind of pinkish, doesn't quite get to black woman, but it is in a black cloak. So you can see how it's trying to get to something, but is a miss. And you start to think, like, I think of myself very much as a layperson. I'm like, well, what and why is this happening? How is this the outcome, right? My experience with Not the Only One and Bina 48 is, oh, what they're being fed, the data that is being used to create these images does not have a full enough representation, right, to create black woman well yet, right? Or at least this system that I'm using in this time and space with the data set that they provided, because that's what I use, not my own, but theirs. So I started doing these experiments periodically, right? This is a different version of this thing. So I thought, okay, let me try a different kind of statement, an African-American woman smiling. And I changed to African-American to give the system a chance because black seems to turn things quickly, right? So I'm like, okay, let me give it a little bit of space and time here. African-American woman smiling. This is the image I got back out. way better, still not perfect, right? And the images on the side that are an animation are the images that Google, and I did this one on Google Colab, and Google Colab is a space, for those of you who don't know, that you can go and run code and have a lot of fun with and change it and start to play, and I encourage everybody to go and do that play. Practice is very important to me in the way I think about the technology, and I hope that others will start to really get their hands dirty when they're thinking about the technology. So, an African-American woman smiling. Let's see. A dark-skinned African-American woman smiling, right? Like, when you think about it, it's like, what is that? Like, where is this image coming from? Like, how is this the outcome of this? When I look at these closely and slow it down, I start to see a lot of butts and teeth, all right? Butts and teeth might be porn. I'm not sure, I can't pinpoint that. But it's like, what is this conception of Black, especially dark-skinned Black womanhood, come to? And how is this the image? And this is 2022, so okay, we're having some problems here. And then as the control, we have a woman smiling. Still not perfect, right? And it feels to me very location specific in some ways, but it's like, what are our conceptions and how are we making these? And for me, the question becomes, well, how do we change this and how do we get it better? And we've come to the point where, oh, we're generative now. We don't have to worry about this. And I just ran this today just to see what would go down. So this is a Black woman crying from Dali this afternoon. And it's interesting, right? So I asked ChatGPT, give me an image of a Black woman crying. I just put in Black woman crying. It said, okay, I'll create this image for you. But then it went in, and this is what I find super fascinating about this process. The description below, a close-up portrait of a Black woman with dark brown skin, her eyes filled with tears. Some of the tears are rolling down her cheeks, blah, blah, blah. That's ChatGPT filling in information for me to try to give me what it thinks I'm asking, right? I don't like either of these images. I put two because the first one came out on, what is this, the right over here. I didn't like that one, so I tried it again with a little bit of a difference, right? And it's like, oh, like how do we start to think about this? Because now we're getting images that look plausible. Like, I could go, yeah, this is fine, this is plausible. But it also uses style in a way that I hate. Right? That kind of homogenizes us into this one kind of commercial look of a thing, right? And I put in I altered the description a little bit. I tried snapshot. It still gives me the same things. And so it's like, what do we have to do to get around the system? And do we want a system to write our descriptions like this for us? And I became concerned with this because I've been playing with Sora as well and realized that, it's writing into what it thinks we want in terms of a kind of view of humanity that is very media and surface-based as opposed to deep, sought-after, deep research, deep conceptualized versions of what and who we are. And I call this the wedding dress problem, right? So if you think about this image, it's 3 women in wedding dresses, right? They're all wedding dresses. And actually, globally, the one that probably gets used more across the globe is the red sari, right? Proportionally. But if you think about what the conception of a wedding dress is, right? We generally, like if I'd said to you before I showed this image, what would a wedding dress look like? Like, we have a conception of what comes up quickly, right? The trite version. And the question for me is, how do we get all of these versions of what something is to be represented in the ways that we are presenting ourselves back to ourselves, right? Equally, maybe proportionally. Like, that would be sort of fair, right? How do we do that? How do we start to make systems that look beyond what the first, second, third order of information is into a deeper conception of what a global majority looks like, perhaps, right? And really the things I'm thinking about is, can we create systems of care and generosity? And I mean this writ large, right? So small and large, I would say within systems like our university here. How do we do that? How do we create systems that help us care and love for each other, versus systems that allow us to be angry and disgruntled, right? And pushing against things. What do we have to do? My answer to this question for project's sake was an app that tried to ask people, well, what are some common definitions that we might come up with? For example, this is a project that is defunct at this point, but will come up in another way, called Binary Calculations Are Inadequate to Assess Us, where we were trying to ask people to define things in any way they saw fit. And so I mean text, image, dance, singing, I don't care. I let the burden of getting the data to be something that can be usable be on me versus on the person that's trying to represent who and what they are, right? Especially thinking about what their capacities might be. Like, I always dreamt that this project would go almost anywhere, completely out to, Maasai in the desert with a flip phone, right? And what would they say? But we don't really have good common language for many of the things that we talk about. It's interesting if you, and you can do the work, if you look up care, you will see something very interesting in Google. And so I'm thinking about now these ideas of how we do this, how we get people the space to do this, and then what our struggles are. So pulling in a little Sylvia Winter with a little Sora-generated video of a Black woman surfing on an okra pod behind it. So the struggle of our new millennium will be the struggle of all of us to reconceptualize the human outside of the terms of our present mode of production, to re-envision the human not as a naturalized and over-reified referent, but as a hybrid auto-instituting, languaging, storytelling species, right? And this is very akin to something that I think about a lot in terms of our stories and what they have done for us through millennia, right? Like as a species, we've told stories forever. We've instructed each other forever through the stories that we tell. And it's like, how do we take these stories? How do we take the information about survival and cultural norms and relationships and community and value, right? And put them into our systems so that they understand us a bit better? How do we hear each other's stories? Because I have a feeling that we often tell stories, but we refuse to hear those stories, right? And so this Project Secret Garden was this installation and a website, basically, that had Black women telling their stories. So it's a space where, well, we'll let it tell you a little bit. Audio might be helpful here. Audio? Oh, maybe I've taken out the audio, so I'll tell you what's going on here. This is a web-based piece, the web-based version of this piece, where you can go in and you can go on secretgarden.stephaniedinkins.com and play with this piece. And it's kind of a hunt for these women who are standing in this garden. The garden is a kind of conceptualization of my grandmother's garden, complete with some things of the agrarian American, so some cotton and okra and roses because my grandmother. But these stories are not pinned to these women, and they are stories of the future, which is the character in the corner, from a slave girl who I imagine coming over and just what she wanted. And all the stories are not pinned to the characters, they are pinned to people who are listening to the piece, right? And if more people listened, they got more of the story. So it was about congregational listening, about coming together, about paying attention, right? That's where the kind of AI or machine learning or computer vision comes in, right? Trying to read audience and give them a response based on their response. But the project in itself really got me to this point where our stories are algorithms, right? We know what they are. Now, how do we share them? How do we share them equally? How do we share them equitably in a way that can help us form a world that will be supportive of most on the planet versus a select few, right? I'm trying to think if I have anything else to say about Secret Garden. No, I think I don't. I think it's a conversational piece built on love and sharing and listening. And that leads us to this, right? And you'll see that my practice is dotted. It's darting around because I'm trying to figure out, like, in any way possible, how do we change systems? And what do you have to do to change systems? So this is an image of AI assembly, which happened in Montalvo, California, last summer, not summer before last. It included some SBU MFA students and then some theorists, some technologists, some other artists, and you will see that there are children in this image, and I think they are super important presence in the way that we were talking, because every day at 5 o'clock we would get together and have prolonged conversation and meals. The conversations were generally about artificial intelligence, what we were thinking about it, what we want to come out of it. We did a lot about wisdom versus knowledge versus intelligence, right, and what that might mean. We were thinking about digital personhood, right, or algorithmic personhood. What does that mean? And like, how do we access systems? But of course, I think also, how do we take advantage of the opportunities afforded by the systems, especially in a world that is often telling us that those systems are against us, and they may well be, but maybe they are also a space of opportunity that we can make into, right? That we can push into, that we can dream into. That we can kind of create through ancestors, like you'll see some ancestral wisdom there. It's interesting, I was listening to Nexus on the way here, Noah Harari, right? And it's interesting because he's talking all about power and wisdom. And it's like, well, what does that mean? These ideas of where power and how power forms, what information is to that power, and information being story, and how wisdom, the wisdom to wield that power comes about, right? What can we do, and what can we do as individuals becomes a really big question. And I think in a way it takes, some kind of purging first, right? I'm so jumping around today, I'm so sorry. A way of purging, right? And so I made this piece called, Say It Aloud, that asks the audience, what do you need to release to move forward, right? And in AI assembly, it's like, what do you need to do to make well? I will ask you all another question at the end. But how do we go forward? How do we think about our surroundings? What are we doing, right? And so
I've got a doozy.
Oh, we're going to skip all this audio today, right?
That changes what valued experience in the 21st century is.
Yeah. Something is totally up with the audio and the feedback today. So this is Professor Commander Justice, who was named by Not the Only One, by the way. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. We have big circles. And she is doing a bit of a rant manifesto about what it means to think about what you truly want and desire in the world. Not the thing that is given to you, not the idea of the white picket fence and a house, right, 2 cars, blah, blah, blah. But if you had to think about it, what do you in your heart of hearts actually want to put in the world? And I think this is a really important question. I think this is a really important algorithmic question, right? Like, how do we put that question and then make something that allows us to help manifest it into our technologies? Yeah, she's trying to make space for people to let go of things. The little globules you see on the side are people, because this is a roundabout project where people could then click in and add what they wanted to release. It's a really interesting place. Again, you can go to this one at sayitaloud.stephaniedinkins.com and add your own thing and see what people have put in there and float with it. And then we're getting to what I'm thinking about now. And I think all of this comes to a point of, what I would call love and data, thinking about communities, giving communities opportunity to say their piece, to have often neglected or overlooked or disregarded information included in the public record, right? And I should say that this is a piece that's trying to come into being. It is actually called The Stories We Tell Our Machines. It is a piece that wants to allow people to say, hey, what cultural context would help AI become a better collaborator, right? So if we're thinking of ourselves as collaborators with these systems, what would make it better? My personal conclusion is always this idea of, well, I think it needs to know more. And maybe it needs to know deeper, right? It needs community information that is grounded in ways of being that aren't necessarily recorded in the ways that we generally record, right? And how do we give it that, and how do we make space? And so what was happening here is there's a microphone, and people would walk up to it, and they'd get a question, and they would try to answer the question. While they're doing that, the machine or the system is reading them, right? Running them through an algorithm, and then trying to give a picture of them back to themselves while they're standing there. And the idea is to unveil some of what's going on, right? The processing of, like, if we have a generative system and we have a picture of you and we add that to kind of my own ideas and aesthetics, what would you come out of on the other end? Not only what would you come out as a picture, but what would you come out of as a description? So it's this round trip in space. And you'll hear me say this a lot, right? I'm like, oh, not ready for prime time, not good enough, because I will put things into space and public way before they're ready to be in public. I like the experimentation. This, for example, is at the Guggenheim at a night where we were having, like, we just put up a bunch of projects and then had conversations around them, let people engage them, play with them, see what they thought. It's a learning process for me as well. But it's interesting then to give people the kernel of a kind of conversation or what's coming or where they go. This is another piece that we put out that night. It's called Wisdom Bot, and it's actually a direct result of that AI assembly at Montalvo. So everybody at that residency, we made a spreadsheet, and I love to say this, right? Because we really made a spreadsheet of data of what we were considering wisdom at that time. Like, what do you consider wisdom? And when I asked the question, what I was asking was really about deep wisdoms, family wisdoms, cultural wisdoms, community wisdoms. And so we made this spreadsheet and used ChatGPT to whip up a really quick chatbot, which you can do now, right? And so it's interesting because I always say that not the only one, started in 2018, still ongoing. I don't think it's finished yet, will never be whole in a certain way. This thing we whipped together with the help of one of our technologists. Actually, we had two amazing technologists with us. Within a week and a half, right? And it's really pretty good and logical, and with only fine tuning, right? So adding our information to what's already available in ChatGPT, got pretty high fidelity results from what we were saying wisdom was. One of those things is Foucaultian, because somebody put in Foucault, which I thought, like, I was having trouble with that, right? I'm like, Foucault is not wisdom, might be knowledge, but it's interesting to see what's possible now, right? And this is always where I'm at. It's like, well, what's possible? We know what's being put at us. We know what we can consume. And I wonder, what can we not only consume, but what can we change? And this is a kind of cohesion of that idea. This is an artwork called Afro-Nowism, Now, Own Now, and a kind of manifesto that I wrote. While it is called Afro-Nowism, I think it is something for everyone to think about, so I will read it, right? Afro-Nowism is a willful practice that imagines the world as one needs it to be to support successful engagement today. Afro-Nowism is imagining oneself in a space of free and expansive thought, acting from a critically integrated space, not from opposition, which often distracts us from more community-sustaining work. Afro-Nowism demands recognizing which ideas have been so deeply internalized that we no longer recognize them as external. Afro-Nowism requires imagination, serious play, and action. I think the serious play is key here. I think the idea of not always acting against something is super important as well, especially when there's so much to react against, right? Like, if we think about this moment, we have so much to react against. But I wonder how you build if you're always reacting against something that's outside of yourself, right? And so I'm just asking people to take a moment and really consider what it is that is deep for them, what they would truly like to see. And then not only consider, but then, right, the thing is go out and try to make it. And I say that in all seriousness. I say that in that I'm a person who's going out and making it, and I don't know anything I'm doing. I mean, I've learned a lot along the way, I cannot lie, but I know nothing, right? In some ways that feels super dangerous, in some ways that feels super powerful and a lot of potential energy, and I would prefer to err on the side of potential energy. I will tell you that through my travels in the art world, I've run into folks who I can't even, it's hard for me to know that I've run into them, right? So for example, people who I've done workshops with who are young folks downtown Brooklyn, say something between 15 and 24, say 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I took some VR to them thinking, oh, we're just gonna check out some VR. Surely we've all seen, they'd never seen VR, never. Like they had not encountered it. When VR is being posited as one of the things that's forming our world, right? Like, how do we live with that? I don't understand how we live in a place where we can't touch and understand the technologies around us, where we don't have access to them. And then when we do have access to them, maybe we're not even given entree because maybe we don't have the right background. I'm here to tell you I do not have the right background. I don't care. I'm going to try to push through to see what I can do and then open space for others to push through. So like those kids, it's like, how do we get you into VR and how do you get you making something? Like that's all I want to know. And hopefully I can get you so interested that you want to keep pursuing it over time. But it seems really imperative to me that we're creating a world that no matter where folks are, they have access to the technologies that we're talking about. They have access to a lot of things, but that we're allowing our imaginations to really enter the space, and all of our imaginations, right? Not just those of us who are privileged enough to be here. And so with that in mind, in a sense, I run the Future History Studio at Stoller, room 4222. Come on over if you want, although you should check just to make sure somebody's gonna be there. And we are trying to do some really interdisciplinary hands-on stuff. We are playing, right? We are hanging out. Like you can come there and you might go, what's going on? You guys look like you're just hanging out. We're hanging out, we're talking, we're trying to make things, we're trying to work beyond ourselves. And it's kind of fun. We think a lot about this statement, or at least I do. And this is another Sora image. I've thrown some weird Sora generated videos in here of a campfire with computers listening. So we are committed to the idea that study is what you do with other people. It's talking and walking around with other people, working, dancing, suffering, some irreducible convergence of all three held under the name of speculative practice. The notion of a rehearsal being in a kind of workshop, playing in a band, in a jam session, or old men sitting on a porch, or people working together in a factory. There are these various modes of activity, and I would add of being. The point of calling it study is to mark that the incessant and irreversible intellectuality of these activities is already present, right? And I think that's hyper important. I've learned this from my grandmother, who I think was an artist. She would never have said that, but her garden was truly an art and a site of social practice, right? And I think we probably all have spaces, and that was Fred Moten primarily. Here are just a few clips from Future History Studios and us having fun. Some MFA students, Josie helping Hagar make an AI bot, actually. Coleman Collins talking to a guest about her filmmaking, and Ayana, I'm sorry, I'm losing her name right now. Ask me if you really want to know, I will look it up. Student, undergrad, doing some computer vision and having fun with Touch Designer. And Josie inserting herself into the tree. You will see that like our technology all looks like playful weirdness, right? But it's like, what's beyond it? Josie was an MFA student, computer scientist, working in AI, making bots and pieces that are, playable by others, whether you're playing to make it or playable and relatable. And that's what we're trying to do, make the space and the place and the time to play and tinker. Tinker is another big one for me, so that you can start to discover where your space in this might be, or how your scholarship might be impacted by the act of touching. I will tell you that I have been in communion with some colleagues that, you know, are talking about AI and writing about AI, and doing it when they haven't really touched it that much. And sorry, I think that's totally dangerous in some ways because of the weight that the words that these people have, right? And it's like, listen, you know, the colleagues would say, well, I'm working on this thing and, you know, the AI doesn't do it. And I'm like, are you sure? How hard have you tried, right? It's like, it doesn't include me, right? And this is common because we're told to think it doesn't include us in certain ways. It's like, well, yeah, maybe not on the face of it, but what have you tried to push the system, right? And then we were working again with some generative systems, gave them to some code to get things to do anything now, to break it, basically, right? To jailbreak so that we could get behind the system a little bit. And then suddenly the system was doing what they wanted, which was playing the dozens, right? They wanted the system. They wanted to be able to have a black dialect and play the dozens. And it did it. You just had to break it to get it there. And I get it. I shouldn't have to break it to get exactly what I want. I shouldn't have to run into spaces where now a problem is often that, you know, the limit of content or them trying to keep us safe limits what you can do. For instance, once I was trying to generate an image of a slave ship on DALL-E for a NFT series we're making. It was super interesting because it would not give me a slave ship, right? It's just like, no, can't do that. It's like, why? That is a historic image, right? Like, I'm asking you something of our history. What does it mean to just chop that out to keep us safe? And I find it interesting because I equivocate a bit, because I think one of the reasons I couldn't get it was because of all the work that particularly a bunch of Black women are doing in the world to get these systems to work well, right? Ruha Benjamin, Safiya Noble. Like, there are lots of folks who've been, and you can see where things have been shifted and changes have been made. But I always say, oh, they've gone in with a machete, right? Where's the scalpel? Like, how do we both keep our histories and protect ourselves, right? How do we put our histories in a light that allows us to know the history but not be bound by it? That becomes a big question, and that I try to work with and try to get people to work with as well. So this is just a funny, but this is the question that I ask everyone. What does AI need from you? I think AI needs something from everybody in this room in one way or another, whether that is just being someone who watches it and says, hey, something is wrong. Like in this weird video that I have generated, which is a robot telling stories to what was supposed to be a gathering of Black folks. And then I always like to take these and then take apart what I'm being given, right? And go, well, why is this what I've been given? Why are these the people? Why can't they look at the thing that I've asked them to look like, right? And I encourage that as well. If you are using these systems and playing with them, thinking of them, you know, thinking of them. I'm gonna say think of them, because I think as we go along, these are gonna become more and more just tools for us. And then the next thing will be the thing that we have to catch up to. The reason I put in the women surfing is because I think a lot about what it means to surf our environments, our systems these days, and what that means, and that they change so quickly that, you know, right now everybody's like, generative AI, it's gonna be, right, we have to catch up, we have to do curriculum. This is gone. Like, the folks who are making it are saying, 5 years, generative AI, basically dead, or it'll be a tool, right? We're on to the next thing. And how do we keep up with that? How do we educate towards that? How do we stay nimble enough to be in a world that is ever changing super quickly? This is just an outtake of the thing that I will be doing soon. So look for it in May 2025. The stories we tell are machines somewhere in Brooklyn, I think Grand Army Plaza, but we will see. But it will be an actual lab where you too can contribute something, right? And I think everybody has things that are precious, that are informational, that are descriptive of their communities or of things that they hold precious or think are missing from the record to add to our knowledge of ourselves. So soon, and this is a weird generated image, so it will not look like this in the long run. You'll see that I like a good generative image to kind of look at, and then we move on. And then I'll just leave you with a thought that algorithmic care, and I do believe algorithmic care is possible. We do punitive very well, right? We know how to surveil. We know how to follow. So if we can do those things, surely we can figure out how to do things that bolster people, that support people, right? I encourage you to try that in your work. If you are building, like, how do you build care into the systems that you're making? How do you make those systems and be responsible for the systems? I'm gonna go back for 1 second, just so I can say something else, because I forgot something right here. Because at the Guggenheim, and this is where I came to this in a way, this bot, people were asking it super consequential questions. Like, people ask, will my partner die? My partner has cancer, will they die? Like, they just ask the craziest questions that I never expected them to, in a museum where a bunch of artists have put together this kind of toy of a thing. And it's like, well, what are our responsibilities to those people and how that thing goes into the world? We were gonna stick this on the web and just have it be available for folks, but I can't until we figure out the way to be responsible to whoever might be using it, or to explain in the way that is solid, so that we have an understanding that this is not the oracle you seem to want to encounter. It isn't a thing in the world that might be an interesting partner, but it's not the thing that you are wishing for in that moment. So yeah, algorithmic care, a deliberate, unending pursuit. I hope you will all pursue it. Thank you very much. And I love questions, so.
Thank you, that was unbelievable. I'm playing a combination of Monica and Carl to help us get to the questions. Can we give one more round of applause to Stephanie? That was an incredible talk. I'm definitely going to be thinking a lot about taking it to the would-be. Is that what? Yeah, that's my new favorite phrase. So I would like to open the floor up. There are microphones on both sides.
I love the ideas.
Hello. Hello. Thank you for that talk. It was amazing, Stephanie, really amazing. I was really struck by the comment you made earlier about what it's not permitting anymore when it comes to generative images. I've been working with DALL-E for a while, looking at kind of ideas about climate change and representations of climate futures. And up until about 2 or 3 months ago, I was getting some interesting imagery back on kind of narratives that I would, kind of bring in to ChatGPT to generate these images that I wanted to explore. And then at a certain point, that just stopped. It would no longer allow any images of the future of climate change. And the response was, this was, I took a picture of the wording, but I found it deeply troubling that somehow the generation of the image supported an idea of climate damage. That in picturing a future of climate change, that it was supporting that kind of future. And for me, that wall now that has been put up is blocking a creative way of thinking about futures linked to past behaviors. And so I'm just wondering if, given your experience now, what you're saying about this, as you say, hacking, what can we do to kind of get back in there and say you can't pull out all the ideas for future thinking?
Yeah, I think that's a multi-level question, right? It's interesting because there's the complaint level, right? Remember when Google had the founding fathers they were generating as black, which is interesting but not accurate, right? And how do we start to think about that? And then people saying, well, no, this is problematic, it's warping the history, what do we do? There's the hacking, right? Like, I'm always into what have people done to get around some of these blockages, because yeah, we need to be able to imagine into these futures, and not just the ones that have been rubber stamped to be okay, right? But the ones that we are puzzling about, that we're fearful of, that we're really hopeful of, or, you know, that has something on the side, but it takes a lot of work to figure out what that is, and maybe some coding, right? Or maybe some asking. I'm not sure if Do Anything Now's work, right? So this is the problem with this, right? Because Do Anything Now's, we looked at that a year and a half ago. I'm sure that there is a whole nother version of what that is right now that I haven't looked at lately, right? And so it's like, what is the version of Do Anything Now? And this would be my way of doing this. What is the version of Do Anything Now that's available at this point, right? Check it out, how does it function? And then how do I break the Do Anything Now to do what I need it to do versus to what some hacker dude did in his basement, right? Like, it just becomes, like, it feels like a cat and mouse game in lots of ways. And then, of course, not leaving it local. Like, I always think we need to actually report and talk to people about these things, which is why I stand here and say things. Because without calling it out, without saying to Google or Meta or whatever, right, whichever OpenAI of these places that are kind of running things, this is problematic, or where's this change, or how is this working, or how is this changing the way that we view our histories, then we're going to be stuck in this cycle. And it's like that, since people do that, like, move fast and break it, right? Like, develop fast and break it, then if that's what it is, then I need to kind of watch fast and call it out as well. And we don't get to rest. This is kind of that exponential change I'm talking about. Like, I feel like we don't get to rest anymore, right? Or trust that it is the thing that it is, because it's not, and it changes. And when it changes, it does it has the potential to do real damage. There was Replica AI. Anybody familiar with Replica AI, like the Friends? They changed their algorithm, right, some time back. And it's like, oh, suddenly people's friends who they were talking to and relying on and relating to, sometimes in a kind of therapy-esque way, just changed. And took away that thing that they were relying on. And that's dangerous, right? And so I think it's upon us to really think about that and advocate that and ask for it. And then my other strategy is, well, people will then say, you can't quite do that. And that's why I make things. It's because, like, well, I'm sorry, I'm going to say this anyway. I'm an idiot. And I made this thing that does this thing that you told me is not possible. That means that you can do such a better job of doing this. Let's see it, right? And in that, I found some weird power. Like, I ran into some computer scientists at a very well-known school who were like, oh, right, we're working on the same problem. I'm like, right. Now, how can we do it in a way that functions deeply and well versus just pushing it out quickly, right? Because the push towards capital and commercialism becomes a problem as well. But it's hard. You're gonna, like, if you ask me other questions, you're gonna watch me just go, because it's so hard to do, but I think it is on all of us to truly participate. Don't sit back and accept what's there, and that's at whatever level you're at. Yeah. Thank you, Linda, for that question.
Thank you. So I know there are really great questions in this room, but while you're thinking of them, I would love to hear you say a little bit more about algorithmic care. And I mean, I love the idea of love and care is like not the first thing that comes to my mind when I think of AI. So I'm curious, but I think it's potentially, perhaps paradoxically, an incredibly exciting, fruitful path forward. But can you tell me a little bit about the things that you envision when you're thinking about that?
Well, when I'm thinking about algorithmic care, I'm thinking about the ways in which we think our systems are enacting in the world, right? And so if we're thinking about algorithmic systems, like what code do I have to write, right? Or what data, or how do I have to treat data so that it can act well, be supportive, right? And that's like as you're developing, right? Or as you are creating data, as you are using data, like what questions should I be asking beyond the basis, right? Is this something that calls out positives or negative? Like if we're gonna be binary about it, right? Which I think we shouldn't, we should be gray in our outcomes. But like, what does it mean to try to create systems that support people, right? And I have trouble with saying people because I think it needs to support way more than people, right? The ecosystem that it works in, which is broad, right? Can you change a little bit of the code to make it think about this information differently? Can you, if you're making, like, well, maybe an easy way to think of it is like if you're making a system that judges are using in their way to decide on who gets, right? And this was a ProPublica article a while back. Like, who gets what kind of time, right? How do you arrange that? Do you use the historic data that is at your disposal as is, which is totally biased and pretty rank? Or do you find ways to make weights that try to do a little work to even some of that out, right? And that in itself is a lot of work, right? Because what does it mean to even something out in that way, right? And how do you do that, right? Beyond, like I call that, because people who usually get longer time, especially using the systems that were being used, were Black folks, right? And I would call that a black tax, right? And so how do you kind of account for the black tax and fix that a little bit? But then are we going to do this for everything in every way? So then the question becomes a bigger one. Like, how do we just create fairness in the system over time? How do we describe things better? If you look at things like ImageNet, right? So one of the places that a lot of images for AI systems come from, like some of the descriptors, when you look at the labels, like contemporarily, right? They're horrifying, because they come from a historic foundation that has not been thought through, right? Or maybe a cultural perspective that is different. And I feel like there's so much work to be done in trying to like rectify some of that, or at least give them an asterisk in terms of what something means if it stays in. Because, right, I'm also advocating for not cleaning history out of our record, right? And so what is the work? And I feel like everything I say is like, oh, we just have so much work to do in terms of looking back, looking into a future that we want to create, and like doing super hard work. And really, if I'm talking about it, I'm thinking about what are we as a society, what are we as people thinking, and when are we ready to do the hard work that allows us to see each other as equals, right? As the value of every life, similarly, which clearly we do not. Like, all we have to do is turn on the news to know, oh, this life is worth way more than that life, right? How is that possible, right? We're encoding this stuff. How do we start to pull that back and change it? That's what I mean by algorithmic care, because I think that is a possibility. And I also think, like, when we're thinking about it and reporting it, like, how do we do that differently? Because right now, you know, we do a really good job of sensationalizing. We're still going for the clicks as opposed for the information that has value and weight to us as a society, and thinking through it that way. I don't know. And I will add love, just because love I just love to say, because in academic settings it gets people a little antsy. And I think that it's one of those places that we should be thinking out of in one way, shape, or form. And that can be in many guises. Sorry. Hi.
Thank you so much. I wanted to think about the idea of empathy and love. And so many interactions as humans and other species shape our ability to be a sensory being and respond to each other. Mm-hmm. As we now think about developing this in terms of algorithmic care towards each other, could we also think about developing it towards the planet and other creatures that we share this planet with?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's necessary, right? I think that towards each other, for me, really implies towards the planet, towards other entities, towards the systems that we're actually even creating, right? Because if the hierarchy is changing, the system becomes the one that is the ultimate decider. Like, that needs a lot of compassion, a lot of ideas of what care is in order to do well by us. So I think it's a very large question. I just talked about it here in terms of human, but really, and I try not to sound too crazy, because I'm really not even thinking about the human in that way anymore, right? It's more about the ecosystem and the continuum of life form, even synthetic life, that we need to be thinking about. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, Stephanie. I have, I guess, a question, and it relates to when you're talking about wisdom, intellect, intelligence, and knowledge, and when it comes to Blackness, and particularly Black womanhood or just Black femness. And my question is, what are your thoughts around developing AI that creates this understanding of what Black femness, womanhood, and wisdom is, and if it should be protected from capitalist interest, if we're going to put it into the systems?
Yeah, no, this is a really good question, right? I think about this a lot because there's this idea of what information we're willing to give, what should be given, what needs to stay private, right? What is saleable, what is not. And I've come to the conclusion of infection. So in a way, I've been thinking about it in terms of, I don't think I can afford to keep what I know secret. I think the world needs it, needs it badly, right? And so for that, and the bargain is, and actually it's my family's bargain, because my family has gone along with this idea that I'm giving up our information, and there is real information in this thing, is that we have enough to offer the world that is important, that I want to truly infect the world with. And I think Blackness, Black womanness, Black femness is something that I also think about separate from my family, that I'm willing to share it, right? There might be some kernels that I want to keep, but mostly it's hidden in plain sight, right? But it's what can you hide? And what can you protect, and what's the outcome if you don't share, right? And I often think about the outcome if you don't share in other terms, and those are the terms, I met a young Black doctor a while ago that was working with biology, bespoke medicine. He's like, oh man, not enough Black people do 23andMe or any of the DNA testing, so I can't make treatments in the way that I would like to. Right? And it's well, what does withholding get you? And what does giving up some information get you? Right? And where do you get left behind, and where do you get to grow? And those are the things I talk or think about a lot in terms of those bargains, what's worth protecting, what isn't, and how do we grow? And I'm always if in my fearful self, I'm afraid of Black communities getting left behind yet again. Right? When there's I feel like this is a time of great opportunity where we can build into, right? And so it's oh, is it worth that? And if I'm being optimistic about it, right? I'm oh yeah, that's going to help, but it's hard to say, right? But what knowledges does the world need? What knowledges are we coming back to yet again? Right? Right now, indigeneity is having a moment, right? Because these things seem to go in cycles. And it's oh, now we can recognize these plant medicines again in a way that is logical and real when we've forgotten them or disavowed them, right? And what does it mean to kind of push that forward instead? And I'm actually starting a DNA project, right? And it's oh, wow. And I was just talking to a DNA scientist, and he does DNA security and tagging. It's like, oh, could we tag the stories with the DNA as opposed to with an individual's personhood, but with their DNA so that that information goes with it in a way so it can't get separated, right? It's like this idea of that information being stolen and used in different ways. Like we're trying to come to terms with what we might do with DNA and AI and tagging to kind of make those two things coexist and allow communities to hold, I don't want to say own, but I'm about to say own their stories, right? Yeah, own their stories. But it's kind of an interesting space to think of, right? And we're going to build it up probably on the HeLa cell, so I'm super excited about that. Yeah, so I don't know really, but it's an interesting place to play, and I feel like giving is the better solution, at least in my estimation, for my family. But I think it's a decision that everybody's gonna have to make in a way. Although remember that so much of the information about you is out in the world, right? I was just, last thing I'll say, I was just trying to convince my aunt who's part of the project, you know, we're trying to get her not to answer the phone so that people can't try to take her information. So I played my voice through a chat bot for her while looking at her and not talking. And it's like that recognition and knowing. And now, and I say this because, right, I just gave my voice to a system in order to do this. I'm going to use it for other things. Hypothetically, it's safe. I don't know that it's safe. But to try to do that experiment or build that understanding, I'm okay. And I think at the end of it all, if we responsibly or take responsibility for it, we can do things. Yeah, see, I'm equivocating on you, right? I'm like, I don't know. It depends on what day you get me on, right? Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, we have a few more minutes before we get to have some refreshments, but I think there's one more question.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. It was marvelous. I've been thinking of Dadaism and Hannah Hirsch in particular, because you've engaged the thread of AI and you've made it into something playful, you're daring, and you're community-oriented, and yet you reconfigure everything that's human as AI can teach us how to do. At the same time, you're countering the doomsays, the way in which people are often scared of the prospect of AI. So my question after my thoughts on this today, you're the opposite of the I can't do this, Dave. You are the I can do this, Stephanie, as the robot speaking back to you. You're making AI community engaged and caring. So how do you speak to the young generation of creative artists, of architects to be, musicians to be, studio artists to be, who see AI as something that can endanger their careers? How can you, with what you're doing right now, your bold engagement, give the next generation courage to not walk away from AI, but to be as bold as you with it?
Thank you. It's an interesting question, right? I think a lot about this. I think a lot about intellectual property because people ask about it a lot these days. I think we have a lot of work to do in this area in terms of what counts as intellectual property and how we behave around it, right? Because trying to hold on to it seems like a limited notion. It's like one of these oppositional things. I think encouraging folks to use it, it's like, I'm trying to get everybody to use it. I think that it can be an interesting thought partner, right, or drawing partner. I don't think it should be your endpoint, and I really think that I would love that people, instead of simply using it, interrogate it, right? It's like, how do you interrogate the systems that we are looking at. Like, they're fun toys, right? We get pulled in. Like, you know, it's interesting to see that you start on TikTok and you get some nice, like, generative, weird filters and fun, and you get kind of pulled in, and the next thing you know, you're on ChatGPT trying to do, like, how do you not only take what is given, but deeply question it and make around that question versus making, like, some new thing that sort of looks like something interesting but isn't really, right? Like, and I think that's super important in terms of thinking about how we keep innovating as makers, right? I was thinking about that competition where the AI won the photo contest, like last year or the year before. And it's interesting, because to me, it's like, of course it won. It knows the rules really well, right? Like, it doesn't make that much sense. But then, if something can win all the time by knowing the rules, right, by regurgitating the thing that they've already seen and altering it a little bit, what is that, and where does innovation come from? And how do we make the leaps, right? And so it's like playing with it, but knowing that it's not enough just to copy it or kind of use it as a model, but to kind of push it and really see what you can do together. I feel like I'm always in relation with the systems I am in, so it's a relationship where we're guiding each other in some ways. So how are you guided by? How do you learn from? And then how do you make something different with? Yeah.
I just want to thank you for that. I think you've given autonomy back. You've shown us that you can be part of the reformation of the human's autonomy in the age of AI, and I just hope that there are pathways ahead for new generations of artists to not run from it, but to be wholly part of the new human that isn't the Space Odyssey version, right? And it's much more surreal and Dada-esque and playful and joyful.
Yeah, you gotta have some fun, right?
Yeah, totally.
Well,
Thank you.
you just do. It's like once it stops becoming fun, it's hard because it's a lot of hard work. Like, it's a long time to spend in front of computers, but it's also rewarding in the long run, right? So cool. Thank you.
I want to thank everyone for attending today, and can we give Stephanie one more round? Thank you so much, Stephanie.